We started this about 10 months ago in November of last year. I had been interested in this declaration for some period of time, but I knew that the strength would come from the ceremonial leadership, because the Declaration addresses those concerns so directly on spirituality, lands, sacred sites, medicines, and so forth, and language. But I also knew that within the nation, our ceremonial grounds are still fairly strong and active. And I knew that we had to do this in a correct manner. And so I had contacted a couple of the Muscogee, Miko Yargi from Alabama, Miko Proctor from Greenleaf, and Miko Thompson from Hickory Grounds, amongst others, and I think also Arnold Taylor, I believe he's Tustanugee down at Arbica, I believe. And they had come in, and we just kind of talked informally about what the Declaration was, and my concerns and issues, and what there might be. I knew there were certain things that there's a reluctance to speak about from a ceremonials perspective in public. And so I want to be very careful that we did that respecting their roles and thoughts. And I was very excited that they were so understanding of what this possibility was, what the intent of the Declaration, and how it might benefit them. They were very supportive. And so we continued on that and began the translation process. As we went, we had some help from a couple of my friends and colleagues, my former partner who's passed away this year, G. William Rice, and Walter Echohawk. And they had explained what the Declaration, how it came about. And there's a beautiful symmetry to this occurrence today of signing this Declaration, what I call the MDRIP, Muscogee Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples, because in 1977 the process was begun internationally by Philip Deere, one of the Muscogee men from New York, going to Geneva, Switzerland, and presenting to the UN there, and began the process that ended up in this passage by the United Nations adopting it in 2007. And here we are today, the nation, Muscogee Nation, adopting this, our version of this. So that's how it began. It translated into Muscogee in those portions, originally at least, that dealt with ceremonial perspectives. We had met at our Polecat Stomp Grounds in January of this year, had hosted a meeting at Kellyville amongst the ceremonial chiefs, Mikos. And we had about 8 or 9 of the ceremonial grounds there. Of our 13 or so active ones, probably had 30 people there. And we each of them spoke as to their concerns. And there was a common realization that we have problems with access to medicines, concerns about the state laws being enforced upon our ceremonial grounds, about loss of our languages, about taking unauthorized use of our ceremonies outside, fake Indians trying to pretend that they are by taking on these things, about our hickory ground issues. These were common to each of our grounds, and so they were very recognized that the Declaration could address these concerns. So by adopting it today, what's occurred, I believe, and I was trying to understand why I was so excited. I was so proud of our National Council. Sometimes we, as Indians, we like to complain, have concerns about the way our tribal governments act or don't act. But last Saturday, the entire council co-sponsored this legislation and passed it by voice vote unanimously. It was a very proud moment for me. I was very excited for them. I thought it was so wonderful to see. And on the drive down this morning to watch the chief sign this, I was trying to articulate to myself why it was such an exciting moment for me. And I realized that in listening and speaking with my partner, my associate, G. William Rice, that back in the 70s, he and a couple others had gone around to the tribal governments throughout Oklahoma trying to convince them that they had jurisdiction, that they had a right to tribal courts, that they still had territory that they could assert their power over. And most of the tribal governments, tribal leaders at that point just laughed at them. They didn't believe it themselves. They didn't think that the tribes at that point would ever get the tribal courts for 20 or 30 years. But they did, in fact, get the tribes themselves to believe it. The tribes argued for it, and now you hear every tribal leader understanding and asserting tribal jurisdiction and the right to control affairs within their territory. I believe that this declaration is much the same document, that it recognizes our inherent right to exist. It recognizes our right to control our sovereignty. It recognizes our right to have our native institutions. It recognizes the right to be consulted in our processes and those things that impact us. And if the fourth largest tribe in the country understands this and has so thoroughly accepted it that the National Council members, the elected chief and principal chief and second chief attend and understand this and use this in their dialogues, that the ceremonial leaders, the Miko, travel to meetings around the country and internationally discussing this declaration, that perhaps we can convince other tribes that they too can use this, and it becomes the accepted norm. So I think that it's a momentous event, very exciting, and to see the nation being a leader is just wonderful.